Part 1. Chains in the Shadows. The community center smelled faintly of crayons and chalk, the sort of scent that clung to the walls long after the kids had gone home. Zola Moreau sat cross-legged on the worn linoleum floor, a paperback balanced on her knee, and read aloud in a voice soft but steady. The children leaned in, wide-eyed, hanging on every word. They didn't know that the novel she held, the one with the holographic starship on the cover and her pen name in bold type, was hers. To them, she was just Miss Zola, the quiet volunteer who stayed late to make sure everyone's homework got finished. The truth was hers alone to carry. She was one of the most celebrated science fiction authors in the country, her books devoured by teenagers and professors alike. The world knew her stories. Almost no one knew her face. And no one, not even the children curled against her shoulder, knew the other half of her life. That night, when the lights went out in the community center and the kids were safe at home, Zola put aside her notebook and pen. She slid into black clothing and strapped knives and silenced pistols to her body with the same ease as another woman might apply makeup. Under the cover of night, she was no longer the meek volunteer or the faceless writer. She was a ghost, a professional killer, and she was the best. 2 days later, she noticed Malik hadn't come back. He was 16, tall for his age, and carried himself with a swagger meant to disguise how terrified he was of failing the siblings who depended on him. Zola had always watched him closely, knowing how much the little ones clung to him. Now his chair was empty. "Runaway," one of the staff muttered when she asked. "Kids like him always run sooner or later." But Zola knew better. Malik wouldn't abandon the little ones. He'd never leave them without food or protection. Something had happened. Something foul. That night she shed the mask of normalcy and slipped into the city's underbelly. Surveillance cameras, whispered conversations in alleyways, a thug who coughed blood when she pressed a blade under his chin. The trail wasn't hard to follow for someone with her training. It led to the Marino family. The warehouse reeked of sweat, diesel, and desperation. Zola moved like smoke through the shadows, her pistol raised, eyes sharp. She had seen this before, too many times. Girls, boys, men, women, taken, broken, sold. And standing at the center of it all was Lamont Marino. He was broad-shouldered, dark-eyed, his suit immaculate even in the stink of the warehouse. His voice carried authority, deep and smooth, but his jaw clenched in disgust as his uncle barked orders. He was a man built for power who looked as if power had become a curse. Zola watched him sign off on the exchange, her chest burning with fury. Malik was here, drugged, handcuffed, treated like cargo. She stepped closer, ready to kill everyone in her path if it meant getting him out alive. But Lamont's gaze swept the warehouse and landed on her. For a heartbeat, time froze. His eyes narrowed. Recognition flickered. Not of her assassin's mask, but of something deeper. "You," he said softly, almost to himself, "the little writer." Zola stiffened. She hadn't realized he'd been in the crowd at one of her book events, watching from the shadows like she now watched him. Their eyes locked, and something electric, dangerous passed between them. She could have shot him then. She wanted to. But in his eyes she saw not cruelty, not hunger, but conflict. He hated this business. He hated himself for standing in it. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she lowered her gun. Later, when the deal was done and Malik was dragged deeper into the bowels of the warehouse, Lamont cornered her in the shadows. His hand brushed her wrist, firm, not rough. His voice was quiet, laced with threat and something else. "For someone so quiet," he murmured, "you carry a lot of noise." Zola pulled her wrist free, heat rising under her skin. "This noise," she whispered back, "is coming for you." He should have called his men, should have ended her right there, but instead Lamont let her walk away. "Next time," he warned, his eyes never leaving hers, "I won't be so generous." Zola slept 3 hours, then woke with the names of Malik's siblings on her tongue. She brewed coffee and mapped the city in blue pen, tracing the routes most men wouldn't admit existed: midnight trucks, backdoor clubs, basements without exits. She called in favors under a voice changer, stirred rumors that would make low-level guards sloppy. By afternoon, she had an address, a pattern, and a clock she could hear ticking between her ribs. At the community center, the little ones waited on the stoop with backpacks that looked too heavy for their shoulders. A girl with beads in her braids met Zola's eyes and asked, "You seen Malik?" "Not yet," Zola said. Her voice didn't shake. It never did. But I will. The girl nodded like that was a contract, and Zola signed it in her blood. Find him. Bring him home. Burn whatever stood in the way. That night she returned to the warehouse district with a walkie tuned to a frequency she shouldn't know and a posture that made her invisible. 2 guards on the loading dock, one with an ankle holster, one bored enough to be dangerous. She shadowed the bored one through his cigarette break and put him to sleep with an arm around his throat and a whisper in his ear. Don't die for men who don't know your name. He slid down the brick wall like a shed coat. Inside the air was colder. A corridor of locked doors. She pressed her ear to the second and heard breathing. Ragged, drug thick. From the third came a choked sob. She moved on. She was here for Malik first. Save one, and the rest would follow. That was her promise to herself when the work threatened to devour her. Save one, and then you're not just a knife. Malik was in the 5th room, wrists cuffed, pupils blown wide. He blinked at her like she might be a dream. She knelt, checked his pulse, whispered, I'm real, and the tension left his shoulders as if he could hand it to her to carry. The lock was high grade. She had better. The cuffs clicked open. Can you walk? If you get me to my feet, he muttered, stubborn even now. She did, and he did. The first step told her he was coming back. They made it to the corridor before a voice froze them both. Don't shoot him! Lamont Marino had the kind of stillness that made other men behave. He stood at the end of the hall, hands down, eyes dark with something that wasn't quite anger. He spared Malik one glance, assessing and personal, and then focused on Zola as if the distance between them was an equation he could solve. You, he said. The word fell like a coin into a well. Zola eased Malik behind her. I only need the boy. And I need to avoid a gunfight in a hallway full of victims, Lamont replied. Walk with me. She laughed once. To where? Your conscience? To a door I can open without what you're carrying. He held out a key card, left, then right. Zola studied him. His voice stayed steady, but his jaw worked as he swallowed whatever order he'd been trained to give. He was practical. He was compromised. He'd noticed her at a book reading and recognized her in the dark. The world didn't often offer a path that wasn't a trap. This looked like one. She took it anyway. Lamont led. Zola kept pace, Malik's breath warm on her neck. At the exit, he swiped them out and stepped aside. 2 blocks south, he said. There's a car that won't set off alarms. I left it for. He broke off, wincing as if the truth tasted bad. For nights like this. What are nights like this? Zola asked. The ones I hate myself for, he said, and his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. She was supposed to leave right then, path clear, debt none. Instead, she said, there are others. They won't fit in one car. Tomorrow, he said. I can't move them tonight without my uncle noticing. Tomorrow they could be gone. They won't be, he said. I made sure the transport order misplaced itself for 48 hours. He looked at Zola, let her see the calculation in his eyes, the resignation underneath. Get him home, then come back if you're going to. I won't call the dogs for the next 2 days. Why? Zola pressed. Because I have to live with myself, Lamont said. And because I think you can do what I can't. She left with Malik and did not run. A block away, she glanced back. Lamont was a shadow in a doorway, head tipped to the sky like a penitent praying to a god who doesn't answer men like him. The little ones didn't cry when Zola brought Malik to the center's back door before dawn. They simply fell on him like tidewater and clung. Zola waited until the first light caught on the beaded braids and Malik's eyes cleared. Eat, she told him. Sleep. When you wake, count your siblings. If one is missing, call the number in your shoe. He looked at her with something like recognition. You're not just Miss Zola. No, she said. I'm not. He nodded once, solemn. Okay. She bought him time with a bodyguard's phone number and a bag of groceries left on the stoop, then went home and took a shower hot enough to peel the night from her skin. By afternoon, she had a plan that tasted like ash, used the man who kept the machine oiled to break it, used the chain to strangle the master. She went to him in daylight, a hotel bar with windows high enough to make men feel safe. Lamont waited in a corner booth with his jacket off and his tie loosened, like a man pretending he'd chosen his own life. He didn't look surprised when she slid into the seat across from him. You're early, he said. You're corrupt, she replied. We both make choices. A muscle jumped in his cheek. You came to negotiate. You came to confess, Zola said. I will give you a way to live with yourself. You will give me what I need to end your family's trafficking for good. You think it ends with a signature? I think it ends with a funeral, she said evenly, and a ledger. I need your roots. I need your drop names. I need the financial spine that holds the thing upright. You give me that, and I'll hand your uncle his last night on earth. He stared at her for a long time, then said, You're not brave in person. No, she said softly. I'm efficient. Something like admiration flickered, and fear. And me? He asked. What do I get? You get to pretend you didn't help me, Zola said. You get to say you tried to stop it. You get to tell whatever God you beg that you did one thing right. And if I say no, Zola folded her hands. I'll put a bullet in your head tonight, she said. I'll kill your uncle tomorrow, and they'll find the ledger without your help. I prefer not to waste ammunition. For a heartbeat, Lamont's eyes hardened. Then, slow as an exhale, he nodded. You want the ledger. You'll need a name. Emilio carries it. He never lets it out of arm's reach. Emilio, she repeated. How attached is he to his arms? Lamont didn't smile. Attached enough to die for them. Then let's not ask him to choose. He reached into his jacket, removed a phone, and slid it across the table. On the Notes app, dates, times, code names, a topography of sin rendered in polite lines. He'd been building it for months, she realized. Waiting for a catalyst or a confessor. She was both. Why? She asked. Because the day I realized the kids had names, I stopped sleeping, Lamont said. And because you look like a person who leaves nothing half finished. Good, Zola said, taking the phone. Because neither do I. They moved like professional liars telling the truth. Separately, seldom speaking, each doing the thing the other wouldn't. Zola hit stash houses and cut locks, shepherding human cargo into vans with church logo magnets. Lamont shifted guards into the wrong places and misprinted schedules that sent trucks to empty lots. He warned Zola when a trap was too neat. She ignored him when she had no choice. Emilio fell first, quietly in a stairwell with a needle in his neck that made his muscles forget their names. Zola took the ledger from his slack fingers and left him propped like a drunk who'd lost his evening. In the hotel room, she flipped through its neat columns and felt the scaffolding of an empire shudder. She called a number only 3 people in the city had, and when a woman with a smoky voice said go, Zola read names and dates and watchwords out loud. The woman didn't gasp or swear. She said, copy received, and hung up. By morning, patrol cars idled outside buildings that had always been private. The last piece was the patriarch. He lived in a mansion that looked like it had been poured from cream and envy, old stone, new glass. Guards who would die to prove a point, and gardeners who knew where the bodies were buried because they put the soil back themselves. Zola walked the perimeter in a borrowed uniform, shoulders squared, cap low. At the south wall, she leaned to tie her shoe and planted a molar of plastic explosive in the seam where the stone met the sensor. She didn't plan to blow it, just needed the house to think she might, to scream so loudly at one point that the security net clenched there and loosened elsewhere. The funeral she'd promised wouldn't be public. It would look like a stroke. A respected man collapsing over an espresso in his private study. How tragic, how sudden. But she needed Lamont to open the door at the right moment and to be seen near the wrong one. They met once more in the hotel bar. He was pale with lack of sleep and something like resolve. He deserves worse than a clean death, Lamont said. So does every man in your books, Zola replied. But the point isn't his suffering, it's the end. Will you look at me when it's over? He asked, and he seemed to hate himself for the question. She considered lying. Yes, she said, because sometimes mercy is the only weapon you can stand to hold. The night broke open with the sound of an alarm on the south wall that wasn't a bomb at all, just a whisper that carried like a scream. Guards ran. Cameras pivoted. The house turned its face to its own shadow. Zola moved through the vacuum. The study door sighed open on well-oiled hinges, and the patriarch looked up, annoyed, and then didn't look anymore. She was beside him and past him, a hand on his wrist that felt like a kindness until it didn't. The poison she'd palmed into his cup had no taste. His face flushed once and then forgot how. He clawed at the air, eyes bulging as if trying to pull breath from a room that had none to spare. Lamont stood in the doorway. Only a second, a silhouette cut from doubt. He didn't move. He didn't call out. He let it happen like a man letting a tide take what it was always going to take. When the patriarch slumped, Lamont stepped to the desk, pressed the panic button hard enough to bruise, and shouted for help in a voice that would sound convincing on every security feed. Zola slipped out the servant stairwell and into the night. Ghost light, unmade. By dawn, the city hummed with sirens and rumors. The patriarch's death certificate named a heart that failed at last to carry the weight of a life badly lived. The ledger, anonymous copies dropped like seeds, sprouted warrants. Vans pulled up to warehouses where men with guns found officers with paper and cameras. Victims stumbled into blankets and questions that might someday become justice. And Lamont Marino, son, heir, reluctant keeper of chains, walked out of his house in handcuffs. He didn't fight. He didn't look for Zola in the crowd. He lifted his chin like a man who had already made the most important choice and was prepared to carry the smallest ones that followed. As the officers read him his rights, a cheer went up in a pocket of neighbors who had learned to keep cheers in their pockets so they wouldn't be punished for hope. Across the street, under the brim of a cap, Zola watched. She felt nothing and too much. The two things burned against each other until they made a quiet that felt like grief. Lamont turned his head as the car door opened, just enough that his gaze skimmed the sidewalk where she stood invisible. For a second, half his eyes found her. He didn't flinch. He didn't plead. He gave her the smallest nod a man could give and still mean it. She inclined her head in return. The car door shut. That night, Zola delivered Malik a bag of groceries and a stack of sci-fi paperbacks with dog-eared corners and jokes written in the margins. For when the little ones sleep, she said. He hugged her without asking permission, and she stood there, arms at her sides, and let him. On her walk home, she passed 3 different televisions glowing through apartment windows, each talking about the Marino Empire, each saying the word dismantled like it was a spell. Reporters speculated. Commentators congratulated. A woman in a robe set down her phone and cried with her hands over her mouth. Zola went upstairs, turned on the kettle, and opened a fresh notebook. She wrote 1 sentence and stared at it until the water shrieked. He was the man who handed her the match and watched her burn the house he lived in. She closed the notebook. Tomorrow she would draft the op-ed under a pseudonym and send a list of resources to the community center. Tomorrow she would visit a basement office where people with stubborn hearts filed paperwork that set victims on paths with names like visa and shelter and school. Tonight she sat on the floor with a blanket around her shoulders and remembered the way Lamont had looked at her in the doorway of his father's study, guilty and grateful, ruined and relieved. She poured tea she didn't drink. She stared at a city she had just changed. She let herself think, for 1 dangerous minute, about a different ending, a different man. Then she folded the thought like paper and set it on the windowsill with the dust. She had made a vow and kept it. The boy was safe. The chain was broken. The price had been paid. In the morning, the headlines would say, "Trafficking ring toppled. Heir arrested." The byline would be a name that wasn't hers. The children would ask for another chapter of a story they didn't know she wrote. Zola washed her cup, set it upside down to dry, and went to bed before the sun could ask her any questions she wasn't ready to answer.